Dr. Melissa Barber, an expert at Yale University, has estimated that it costs just $18 to manufacture a year's supply of Eliquis. $7,100, what we pay, $1,800 to manufacture. Is it true that the same exact drug, Eliquis, can be purchased in Canada for $900 a year?
Senator, that's roughly correct.
Let me ask you this. Even at 13% of the cost in the United States, does Bristol Myers make a profit selling Eliquis for $900 a year in Canada?
Senator, we do make a profit.
All right, so you're selling the product for 13% of what in Canada, of what we pay in the United States, and obviously you sell it there because you make money. So, Mr. Berner, will you commit today that Bristol Myers Squibb will reduce the list price of Eliquis in the United States to the price that you charge in Canada where you make a profit?
Senator, we can't make that commitment primarily because the prices in these two countries have very different systems that prioritize very different things. In Canada, medicines are generally made less available, and it takes oftentimes considerably longer for those medicines to be available, on average, roughly 4 years.
I do apologize. Life expectancy in Canada is 6 years longer than it is in the United States. Mr. Berner, your company spent over $12 billion on stock buybacks in 2022. Given that reality, can you tell Carolyn why you can't lower the price of Eliquis?
First, Senator, let me say no patient should have to go through the types of choices that the patient you just described go through. It is our commitment to continue to bring down the price of medicines in the U.S., and I would love the opportunity to bring down the price of Eliquis in the U.S. Our net prices, what we are compensated, have actually, over the last 5 years, declined.
There is a lot of discussion in our nation about how divided our people are on many issues, and that is absolutely true. But on one of the most important issues facing our country, the American people, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Independents, conservative, progressive, could not be more united. And that is the need to substantially lower the outrageous price of prescription drugs in this country. According to a recent poll, 82% of Americans say the cost of prescription drugs is too high, and 73% say that the government is not doing enough to regulate drug prices. As a nation, we spend almost twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other country, $13,000 for every man, woman, and child. And one of the reasons that we spend so much is the high cost of prescription drugs in our country. The outrageous cost of prescription drugs in America means that 1 out of 4 of our people go to the doctor, get a prescription, and they cannot afford to fill that prescription. How many die as a result of that? How many suffer unnecessarily? Nobody knows. But my guess is it is in the millions. And I have talked to many of them in Vermont and around the country. Meanwhile, our insurance premiums are much higher than they should be, and hospital costs are soaring because of the high cost of prescription drugs. Further, the cost of prescription drugs in this country is putting an enormous burden on taxpayers and seniors by raising the cost of Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare alone spends at least $135 billion a year on prescription drugs. So this is not only a personal issue, it is an issue of the federal budget. Meanwhile, as we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, 10 of the top pharmaceutical companies in America made over $110 billion in profits in 2022. They are doing phenomenally well, while Americans cannot afford the cost of the medicine they need, and the CEOs in general receive exorbitant compensation packages. This morning, we're going to hear a lot from our CEO panelists about how high prices are not their fault. and that the PBMs are forcing Americans to pay much higher prices than they should be paying. But let us be clear. In 2022, Johnson & Johnson made nearly $18 billion in profit, paid its CEO over $27 million in compensation, and spent over $17 billion on stock buybacks and dividends. That same year, Merck made $14.5 billion in profits, handed out over $7 billion in dividends to their stockholders, and paid its CEO over $52 million in compensation. And Bristol-Myers Squibb made $8 billion in profits last year, while recently spending over $12 billion on stock buybacks and dividends, and giving its CEO over $41 million in compensation. Now, why did a majority of members of this committee invite these three pharmaceutical CEOs to testify today? And the answer is pretty simple. Mr. Berner, we will want you to explain to the American people why Bristol-Myers Squibb charges patients in our country $7,100 a year for Eliquis, when that same exact product can be purchased for just $900 in Canada and $650 in France. Mr. Duato, we're going to ask you why Johnson & Johnson charges Americans with arthritis $79,000 for Stelara, when that same exact product can be purchased for just $20,000 in Canada and just $12,000 in France. Mr. Davis, please tell us later why Merck charges Americans with cancer $191,000 a year for Keytruda, when that same product can be purchased for $112,000 in Canada and $91,000 in France. And let's be clear, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, and Bristol-Myers Squibb are not just charging higher prices in the United States compared to other countries. They are also charging Americans much higher prices today than they did in the past, even accounting for inflation. And let's be clear, the overwhelming beneficiary of these high drug prices is the pharmaceutical industry. How do we know that? Well, that is precisely what they tell their investors. According to their own shareholder reports, Bristol-Myers Squibb made $34 billion selling the blood thinner Eliquis in the United States, compared to just $22 billion in the rest of the world combined. Make their money in the United States. In other words, the U.S. accounts for nearly two-thirds of all global sales of Eliquis. Not a single dollar of this revenue is going to PBMs. 100% of it is going to Bristol-Myers Squibb. Johnson & Johnson has reported to its shareholders that it made over $30 billion in revenue selling the arthritis drug Stelara in the United States since 2016, more than twice as much as the rest of the world combined. Nothing to do with PBMs. Merck has reported to its shareholders that it made $43.4 billion selling the cancer drug Keytruda in the United States, compared to $30 billion in the rest of the world combined. Now, our CEO panelists from the drug companies will tell us this morning how much it costs to develop new drugs and how often the research that they undertake for new cures is not successful. And they are right. We appreciate that. But what they have not told us in their written testimony is that 14 major pharmaceutical companies, including Johnson & Johnson and Merck, spent $87 billion more on stock buybacks and dividends over a recent 10-year period than what they spent on research and development. More on stock buybacks and dividends than in research and development. It turns out that in our dysfunctional and extraordinarily expensive healthcare system, hundreds of thousands of Americans have gone to GoFundMe in order to raise money to pay for their healthcare needs and for their prescription drugs. Let me ask Mr. Davis, if I might, have you ever searched on GoFundMe for your cancer drug, Keytruda?
No, I have not.
Okay. We have. I and my staff have, and we have found over 500 stories of people trying to raise funds to pay for their cancer treatments. One of those stories is a woman named Rebecca, a school lunch lady from Nebraska, with 2 kids who died of cancer after setting up a GoFundMe page because she could not afford to pay for Keytruda. Rebecca had raised $4,000 on her GoFundMe page, but said the cost of Keytruda and her cancer treatment was $25,000 for an infusion every 3 weeks. Mr. Davis, and please, yes or no, is it true that the list price of Keytruda is $191,000 a year in the United States?
That is close to being true, yes.
Thank you. Is it true that that same exact drug can be purchased in Canada for $112,000 a year and $44,000 a year in Japan?
Generally, yes.
Mr. Davis, even though the price of Keytruda is 1/4 of the price in Japan compared to the United States, does your company, does Merck make a profit selling Keytruda in Japan?
We do.
So what I understand is you make a profit selling Keytruda in Japan for 1/4 of the price that you sell it for in the United States. My question to you is a pretty simple one. Will you commit to lowering the price of Keytruda in the United States to the price of Japan?
Well, Senator, I think first I acknowledge the prices in the United States are higher than they are in many of the countries you said, and not for all drugs, but for many drugs, and that's the reality we face. But I think it's also important to point out that you get access in the United States faster and more than anywhere in the world. We have 39 indications for Keytruda across 17 tumor types in the United States. If you look across Europe, it's in the 20s. If you look across Japan, it's in that number or a little bit less. So there is a reason why the prices are different, and we need to be careful because we are also seeing in those markets that they are unwilling to support the innovation, and we are working hard to try to get them to understand the need to help fund the innovation.
I apologize for cutting you off.
That's fine.
There are 2 other, but I did want to make this point. Again, we all appreciate the breakthrough in important drugs that you and other companies have produced that save lives. No debate about that. But I do want to point out that after all is said and done, and after all the money we spend on prescription drugs and healthcare in general, the life expectancy in Japan is 9 years longer than it is in the United States. Senator Cassidy talked about Canada. The life expectancy in Canada is 6 years longer than in the United States. Life expectancy in Portugal is 6 years longer. Life expectancy in the UK is 4 years longer. Let me ask the last question to Mr. Davis. As I understand it, you made $52 million in total compensation in 2022. Will you commit to not accepting a single dollar more in compensation until there is not a single GoFundMe page for Keytruda?
Well, I can tell you at Merck, we are very much sensitive to what's happening with patients. That's why we have very important patient assistance programs. We commented on the fact that we have over 800,000 patients benefiting, where we provide free drug for those who can't afford it, as well as other assistance programs that help with copay and others. So we are very committed as a company to doing what we need to do to try to help alleviate the challenges patients face that you're focusing on, and that's my focus as the CEO.
I want to get very briefly to Mr. Duerto, who's with Johnson & Johnson. Mr. Duerto, is it true that the list price of Stelara is $79,000 a year in the U.S.? Is that roughly right?
It's roughly right, but it's also true that the average discount of Stelara in the U.S. is 70%.
I
So
know
it's
all of that, and we've dealt with PBMs, and we're going to get to that, I'm sure, in this morning. Is it true that while charging $79,000 in the United States, that the exact same product is sold in Spain for $18,000?
I don't know the price in Spain. I can tell you that the average discount in the U.S. is 70%, so the price that you quote is 30% of that.
Okay. Mr. Duerto, is it true that it costs less than $15 a year to manufacture Stelara?
The manufacturing cost is only a component that goes into our pricing. when we price our medicines, we're looking at the value that the medicine brings to the healthcare system, our ability to continue to invest in research. We invested $15 billion last year. And also, we look at affordability. The average copay, if they use our copay assistance programs in the US, for a patient using Stelara is $10 to $15 per month.
I apologize. I'm over my time. I'm going to give Senator Cassidy the same time that I had.